In the opening scene, Paul is fleeing the apparent end of civilization, with sirens and explosions in the background. In a hiding spot, he cradles his two infant boys, assuring them that they will be fine. 15 years later, Paul and his twin sons, Joseph and Thomas, live in a remote farmhouse. They find tranquility by day but fear the night. One evening, there is a moment of panic when Thomas doesn't return home before sunset from the nearby Rose farm, and the sun begins to set. He eventually arrives, and as the family sits at the dinner table, the boy reveals himself to be the bigger risk-taker of the two brothers, while Joseph appears more intellectual, and he talks about ways of improving their situation beyond mere survival. After dinner, the three board up the windows and doors and move to an upper floor. Some time later, there comes the sound of loud banging on the door. The next morning, they find deep gouges on the outside of the door. Paul convinces Joseph to show him what he's been working on in the barn. It turns out to be a rudimentary car, though the boy has so far been unable to make it work. Paul makes 2 changes, and the motor coughs to life. All 3 of them climb into the car, and Paul shows Joseph how to use the pedals. Before going back to the house, Paul reminds the boys that they have several chores to do. Thomas protests that he wanted to go to Rose Farm, where he secretly has a crush on Charlotte. Paul, however, insists that both boys stay home that night. When Paul is out of sight, Thomas tells his brother that he is leaving, and that Joseph can meet him later at the barn so they can return home together. However, Thomas spends too much time with Charlotte, and then runs recklessly, trying to get back to the car in time. He trips and falls into a crevice, losing consciousness in a cave. With darkness coming on, Joseph returns to the house by himself. Fearing the worst, Paul tells Joseph to lock himself in the house and goes out to find Thomas. Calling for his missing son, Paul finally hears Thomas's voice from the cave and makes his way down to him. He says that they have to block the entrance, as they will have to spend the night there. At home, Joseph hopes to be able to trap one of the intruders so he can study it. In the cave, ferocious creatures try to get to the men inside. Paul and Thomas manage to survive and kill some of their attackers, but Paul is badly injured. The next morning, Joseph uses the car to find them. Paul is still unconscious. The boys put him in the car and try to figure out how to help him. They decide to take him to the Rose Farm, but the parents insist that they can't spare any medicine to help him. Thomas can stay with them, but Joseph will have to go back home with his father. The following night, the creatures attack and kill all 3 parents. Both houses are destroyed. Joseph, Thomas, and Charlotte survive and leave the next day in the car, in search of other people.